Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. In this tutorial, I'll be sharing a technique for using stencils and stamps to create imprints into watercolored backgrounds. For this technique, you need to start off with a water reactive ink or a watercolor medium. I'm using these Distress Oxide inks, and I'll be working throughout the video with 140-pound Fabriano Studio Hot Press watercolor paper. I'm going to go direct to paper with these ink pads and lay down the ink for my background. And I'm using two colors so I can get a nice gradient between the two. I'll mist the whole panel with water and you can see the ink begin to lift and move. The panel also started to curve there with the moisture, so I gave it a quick spritz of water on the back to get it to relax the other way. While the ink is still wet, I'm going to lay this stencil over the panel, and then I'll weight it down on the sides with some acrylic blocks and my ink pads. I just want to be sure that the stencil stays flat against the paper and that the paper is laying flat against my work surface. I'm going to leave this until it dries completely, and that is actually the hardest part of this technique. Once your panel is dry, you can lift the stencil away, and you've got a beautiful imprinted background to use on a card or another project. The stencil that I used here is from istencils.com. And the sentiment is from Simon Says Stamp. For this next sample, I used Core watercolors, and I'm creating a washed background. So I started with a layer of clean water, and then I'm brushing paint into it and letting the water move the pigment around. And I kind of have the color darker toward the bottom. I used this same stencil here, and I actually failed to clean it, so it's got all that beautiful blue and purple oxide ink on the back of it still. Here I'm following the same steps and weighting down the edges of the stencil. And once everything dried, I ended up with a beautiful colored imprint, which was a very happy accident. Here's that panel on a finished card. And then those two sister cards together. If you don't have oxide inks or watercolor paints, you can also use distress or dye inks or even pigment inks for this technique, and those all work very well too. In this sample, I used the same direct-to-paper technique with distress ink, and because these inks are so reactive with water, you don't have to be really exact when you lay them down, which is really nice. This is a stencil that I reach for a lot. It's from the Crafter's Workshop. And I really like these results with the distress ink. I think this background came out really clean. So just take some time to play around and experiment with the inks that you have at home and see what produces the results that you like the best. For another twist on this technique, I started with my inky background, misted it to lift and activate the color, and then I laid a large background stamp over the panel while it was still wet. I weighed it down with a book until it was dry, and this creates a beautiful pattern in the ink. And this works well with a larger or bolder design like this. I did try it with a different background stamp that had finer lines, and it did create texture, but not a really noticeable pattern. Remember, you've lifted ink from your background, and that can still be reactivated on your stamp. So here I've positioned that stamp on my MISTI, and I misted it to activate the ink. And now I've got another pretty background to use on a card, and it looks like I could probably have gotten another print from that ink as well. And it's not as vibrant as the first application of ink. You could definitely get a brighter print by inking up the stamp directly, but it's got a beautiful watercolor effect and a beautiful gradient. Here I have a stamped image from Art Gone Wild. This one is by Catherine Scanlon. I'm going to just add some color to these background areas with some Distress Oxide ink that I pressed onto my craft sheet. And then I'm going to lay my stencil over the panel to create an imprint just in those inked areas. I really love the texture that adds to the background of the finished image. Here's another sample where I used a granulating watercolor paint for my background. And you can see how the stencil really accents that granulation in the areas that were covered up. It's so pretty. There's even a lot of potential beyond even these ideas. I started playing around a little bit with different flat-backed objects, which made for an interesting background. And then here's another one that I did with steel dies, and that turned out really well too. I would love to see your ideas as well, so please be sure to share in the gallery. And as always, thank you so much for watching.